back to Podsauce, your podcast discovery show. Our next guest was on season 1. She's a friend to the show with her other podcast, Criminality. She's booked, blessed, and busy. Rebekah Sebastian is now joining us to cover Die-alogue. Rebekah, what's up, boo?
Hi, so good to see you both again. Hello, hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm going to break down your podcast, Die-alogue, how I perceived it. It's basically the Podsauce for all true crime. You talk to hosts of podcasts that cover true crime, correct?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I also talk to field experts, so lawyers, law enforcement, psychiatrists, forensic experts, very nitty-gritty people who are all involved in true crime or criminal justice. So like your show, yeah, if you're into podcasts, in your case, true crime and mine, my show will go super deep into the weeds of the genre.
Why true crime?
Oh, why not true crime? I think
very fair.
Right.
Very fair.
So I feels like we're at the saturation point with true crime, like it's a recent phenomenon, but from my almost 3 years of interviewing 120 plus people, because I ask them all this, why true crime? When did your fascination start? It's really nothing new. I think humans have been interested in death, not to bring it down, but they have been from, for as long as the world has been in existence. And there's a curiosity around that, like what happens. So true crime kind of gives us this safe way of getting close to these horrible things that we hope will never happen to us. But they're fascinating. And so it allows us to explore those things that otherwise, when do we get to talk about these horrible atrocities? So I think it just gives people permission to explore the worst things humans can do and the worst things that can happen to you.
Rebekah, how do you keep such a positive, bubbly energy around you when you have a podcast Die-alogue, then you have Criminality? I mean, your life is so surrounded by true crime, but you seem so happy and bubbly. How do you do that?
It's a great question. I wonder if my the people that live with me would answer it the same way. They'd be like, she is not light and bubbly. She is a dark cloud of information. I think the human spirit is very resilient, and even in true crime stories, there are amazing themes of justice sometimes, and people prevailing, and sometimes survivors. I talk to survivors as well, and I mean, there are incredibly inspiring stories even within true crime, and I like to hold on to those. I also like to think that the more we explore everything wrong with our criminal justice system and the things we get wrong, that there's things we can also do to right them and to make them better. So I also see true crime as a way to fix some of those things. And the more we know, then the more we can do better. So I try to operate on that side of it, and I take breaks and I practice self-care. I mean, on a practical level, I just have to step away. I love reality TV because sometimes you just can't stay in the murder all the time. So I have to switch it up sometimes.
I think that's what I like about Die-alogue as well as Criminality is your approach to it, right? Even when you're talking to psychologists or forensic experts, there is no glorification of the actual crime. It's very analytical. It's very much so, even with the exploration of the psychology behind the crime and the platform that you give to the victim. Was that intentional? Was that your goal with?
Very much so. Thank you for saying that. I feel like there's a lot of places people can go to find the gory details of the worst things that have ever happened to people. I don't want to be the place where that is.
Right.
So if we're going to talk about a case, we're going to talk about some of the whys behind it, some of the expertise points of view, but we're never going to shame a victim, blame a victim, or glorify the person who did violence ever. So I'm much more interested in what went wrong here. Was it preventable, and what can we learn from this moving forward? And that's very much something I put into place in both my shows. And I really only collaborate with people who see it that way as well. I also think there has to be an expansion of what we care about, that it isn't just, there's a lot of a certain narrative in true crime storytelling. And I'm also trying to expand that so we include more voices in it, more voices about who we care about in terms of missing people, murdered people. There's a lot more than just who we see on mainstream primetime news, true crime shows. that I don't want to name by name.
So with there being so many true crime podcasts, projects out there floating around because it is such a hot topic right now, how are you deciding which one you want to focus on for Die-alogue?
Yeah, another great question. So I try to group my episodes into series. So when I hear everybody talking about something, a documentary everybody's watching or a podcast everyone's listening to, I kind of sit with it a little longer and go like, why? Why is everyone caring about Elizabeth Holmes right now, or Anna Sorokin if we're talking white collar crime? And then I get curious and I think about, what do I know about this subject and what do I not know? Then I look for experts to kind of fill in those gaps and I create a series. So I'm always looking for the angle that nobody's talked about yet. So if it's frauds and con artists, I want to talk to someone like, how can we prevent this from happening to us so that nobody feels badly if it has happened to them? Because we can all laugh about the victims in some of these stories, but I don't think we should, because it's actually very, very common. And for example, my current series is on missing, murdered, and the media. So who are we not hearing about every week on these shows, and who are we not reading about in our local papers? And it's mostly women of color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So every guest I have the next 3 weeks is a woman of color from a different vantage point. I have a professor, a journalist, and a creator, and they're telling their side of this story, and we're examining media and how can we empower ourselves to get the word out and to raise awareness around cases that are getting little to no coverage.
Thank you
So
for
I'm just
that.
Yeah, oh my God, it's my pleasure, and I'm just so grateful for everyone who's willing to talk to me about it, because I just come from a place of learning, like, tell me why. And I always am just trying to look at it from another perspective, like, great, I'm glad we're all enjoying this thing, but what can we learn, and how could we take it, and instead of just consuming the content, maybe consume it and then do something. Like, if there's an actionable step after, I'm all about it. So that's how I approach most of the themes on my show.
So Rebekah, last time you were on our show, you recommended the Tennis podcast.
He stole it.
I
Oh,
loved
yeah.
it. I checked it out. I loved it
Good.
so much that it became one of my picks. So you've already
Good.
got a great batting average. What can you recommend to our audience this time around?
Okay,
good.
do you want 1 or 300?
Give us your
How many do-
give us your top one right now. Give us your top.
Okay. There's 2 that I'm like, just
Give it to us.
dying over right now.
We'll take 'em.
I'm really into Wild Boys. It's a new series under the Chameleon umbrella. So Chameleon puts out a new season, like the last few years, of a different story of someone pretending to be someone they're not. So Wild Boys is a story from like the 90s in Canada about these boys who say they lived in the bush, the wilds of Canada. They were practically starved. They lived off berries, and they just showed up in this little town and said, like, we have no parents. We've been raised in the woods. Well, that's not exactly true. I'll let you
They killed
listen
their
to the
parents.
podcast. But I'm not going to say anything else, but it's this weird, slow, bizarre story that I'm riveted by. And the other is a big one that I'm sure people have heard of, and it's in the cult space. It's
writing
Twin
it down.
Flame Universe by Wondery. And it's, have you guys covered this
What
yet?
What is
Twin
it?
Flame.
Twin
Okay.
Flame.
Okay.
So Twin Flame is the name of the podcast, but it's based on a cult called Twin Flame Universe, about this couple. They're like a spiritual guru duo who have a class. You enroll and they tell you everybody has one twin flame, which is just really a soulmate. I'm like 4 or 5 episodes into that, and I think I'm waiting for the next one. But that's a big red flag, like that whole class.
Well, I feel like these are also amazing recommendations that I'll be checking out, because you have never led me astray. So I am trusting Rebekah's recommendations here.
Rebekah Sebastian, host of Die-alogue, and also I will go out and say, Podsauce family, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, it's always so much fun. I appreciate it.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We have more. This is Podsauce.
I want to get into a Hollypod. A Hollypod for us is a recommendation that has anything to do with entertainment, news, Hollywood, celebs, whatever.
All the things.
All the things that have to do with Hollywood. And my recommendation for Hollypod this week would be Bullseye with Jesse Thorne.
Talk to me.
Bullseye is an NPR-based podcast, but it's all things culture, pop culture, entertainment related, and Jesse does these interviews. huge interviews with celebrities, and it's an in-depth look into their life, their career. The episode that I listened to was the Hannah Waddingham, is that how you say her last name?
You did your best.
From Ted Lasso.
You did your best.
Rebekah from Ted Lasso, if you were a Ted Lasso fan.
Yes, I know her as Rebekah from Ted Lasso.
Exactly. She was fantastic. And it was her whole career trajectory with being a stage performer and that transition. So she was a stage performer in England and that transition into TV, and how many doors were closed for her in the industry as a whole for so long until she walked into the room for Game of Thrones. That was basically when they gave her a chance. She was like, she thought it was a joke that she was even being called in for that part.
Yeah.
They said, yes, you can be in TV now, is basically how she displayed that moment. And then she got Ted Lasso, and obviously her world has completely changed.
Wait, she went from Game of Thrones to freaking Ted Lasso?
Yeah.
The win of it all, from one huge
Yeah.
juggernaut of a show to another.
Exactly.
I just need a rub on her for luck.
And then she talks all about how she's incorporated, obviously, singing into Ted Lasso, because she was a big musical performer, and she was like, I don't want to sing, but it was Jason Sudeikis who was like, no, I want you to sing. I want to show off your talents. And she's like, no, I love this character. It needs to be at the right moment. Anyway, I digress. It was a fascinating interview, and he talks to a lot of people. Kristen Bell, there's a Christopher Walken episode, Charlie Day.
What's the name of this
It's
again?
called Bullseye with Jesse Thorne.
You know what, and I really enjoy like NPR podcasts, mainly because it makes me feel a little more educated.
Yeah.
You know, I feel
Well, I gotta tell
even
you,
when I'm listening to something that's not necessarily substantive, just being on NPR, they just have a way, the way they approach their
production
content.
value is also a lot better, but I've never been let down by an NPR podcast, and I wasn't let down by this one. So that is my Holly Pod pick of the week, Bullseye with Jesse Thorne. So check it out.
Sounds so good. I'm definitely going to check it out, and you guys should stay tuned because we have so much more coming up right here on Podsauce.
Welcome back to Podsauce. All right, if this is your first time tuning in, this is the time of the week that is my favorite. It is when Alesha and I battle it out to who can present the best personal pick. Correct. It's not a battle because I always win. But I would say that you do come with some okay podcasts that you recommend to people.
The shade of it
and
all.
let's get to your okay podcast of the week.
The shade of it all. Oh, I almost want to take my gift back that I gave you today. In fact, put it in my backpack. No, you know what? It's so funny. I stumbled upon this podcast because me and the host of it, we actually follow one another on the gram, and we did this show. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was a really huge show for MTV called Girl Code.
Oh, this show. That was a massive show. Do you remember the show called Girl Code?
It spawned off Aquafina, Pete Davidson, Charlamagne the God, Lil Duval, Nicole
Alicia
Byer.
Renee.
Oh, one day. One day. I'm still paying my tithes, but you know. And so, you know, just every once in a while you want to drop in on your people and see what they have going on. So I found out my girlfriend Annie Letterman has a podcast, and it's called It's Trash Tuesday.
Okay.
And it makes complete sense because it really just feels like Girl Code all over again. I think I am encouraged. Like, one of the episodes is, it had comedian Akash Singh. Are you familiar with Akash Singh?
No.
Really, really big comedian. Well, he's becoming even bigger. But he has an episode on there, and it just feels really good to hear men kind of like squirm in their seats with a whole bunch of women talking about everything. I mean, they run the gamut from, you know, ooh, you know, now you're a zaddy, you know, you're married now. Are you going to venture into zaddy land, like have kids and stuff like that? And you know, so that feels good. It's a really, it's Girl Code meets Seinfeld. It's a show about nothing, you know.
But entertaining,
but
pure entertainment.
Super entertaining. And I think for me, it maybe was a little more nostalgia than anything. I think it's very freeing and liberating to hear women talk so unapologetically and raw about sex and just their conquest. One of the episodes is Annie's Mile High Guy and Esther the Dominatrix. So, just really women taking
Couple
onus.
titles that got my interest.
I bet it
Let me write
did.
those
that
down. All
that
right,
pen is
Trash
moving around.
Tuesday.
It's Trash Tuesday. So, yeah, long story short, it's a beautiful, if Seinfeld and Girl Code had a baby, it's Trash Tuesday is their product. So that's my podcast recommendation.
Sounds like a solid recommendation.
Pinch of
this
nepotism, but a whole lot of, you're
Listen.
going to laugh. You're going to be like, yes. Oh, I don't know if I'll get away with that, but I'm sure it'll be edited out. But they know what I really mean to say. It feels good.
Make sure you check out our YouTube page at the Podsauce. We've got a visual element to this show. You can see all this goodness on your screen.
Get into it. We're giving it. And don't forget, did you say our YouTube page?
Yeah.
Yes, hit like and subscribe, all that good stuff. And also, since you're surfing Al Gore's internet, head on over to our webpage at podsauce.com because we have all of our podcast recommendations. But not only that, you can go down a beautiful rabbit hole of some of the guests that we have on their podcast picks because it's just what we do.
There's so much more on the website than what you see here, so I absolutely
1000%.
recommend you checking out. Don't go anywhere. So much more coming up this Podsauce. Welcome back to Podsauce. All right, man, show went by fast. Big shout out to Rebekah Sebastian from Die-alogue. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Great podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out, I know you have one last recommendation. For
I
today.
do, and this feature is called "It's Just a Really Good Podcast." Not.
I like that.
Not everything needs to be defined, right? Sometimes you just stumble upon a podcast and it's just a really good listen to. And the name of this podcast is called "What Happened To."
Okay.
And so it's just a hodgepodge of people, places, inventions, things, events. You kind of, when it's in the news and it's new, you get this big gamut and onslaught of what's happening to it currently, but then it just disappears, right? Like you think about the death beetles or the, what is it, the hornet, death hornets,
the
death beetles.
Murder hornets. Death beetles.
Death beetles. Listen, we're coming out of a pandemic.
What happened to the death beetles?
What happened to the death beetles?
Nothing. They never existed.
Don't think that they will conjure up a death beetle if they need to get us back in our home.
So this is like an update package.
It's
for
an update package,
the
like
world.
the Chilean miners. What is it? The swine flu. You hear about it and then you don't. And so the episode I listened to was what happened to Blockbuster. Oh, it made me cry. It did because
legit tears.
Yeah. So basically, it just went through. A lot of people assumed that the demise of Blockbuster came at the rise of Netflix, which isn't true. Poor business management. Essentially, when you put someone who was the king of the crop for so many years, Blockbuster, and the minds behind it, they were like one of none for so many years and just killing it in the game. But they didn't evolve and go with the times because there actually was a time where the people who owned Netflix wanted to sell to Blockbuster. But Blockbuster was like, no, no one's doing that. At one point, if you guys remember, Netflix was also, before they became a streamer, they too were mailing out, DVDs and whatnot, and they could not compete with the juggernaut that is Blockbuster. But then what ended up happening is that, Netflix, as they, streamlined their process, Blockbuster did not evolve with the times. So they would open up more stores came with overhead, and as the times were evolving and changing and people were finding other ways to acquire their at-home movie experience, Blockbuster didn't navigate well with those times. And so poor business models, management, evolve with the times, evolve or die, okay? Just
and
because
they said we choose death.
They choose that one, and they died on that hill, honey. But I was listening to this woman who called in, and she said her father had recently passed away, and she had read this article and stumbled upon the last known Blockbuster in the U.S., and she wanted to come visit it because it just reminded her of when her family was together, because her family was divorced, and her parents were divorced, and it just brought back such beautiful family memories, and that's when I was just bawling down crying because same, oop, nope, keep it together. Keep it together, girl. Keep it together. You know, it just reminded me, Blockbuster was a really, really beautiful time in a lot of our lives. And so, yeah, that was that's the episode I listened to.
Wow.
So that's the one I think that we should put up.
Well, if it's making you this emotional, it's got to be a really good episode. We'll put up a link on podsauce.com, and while you're there, make sure you sign up for our newsletter so we can kind of shoot you off stuff to your recommendations to your inbox. And while you're on the website, I'm telling you, you will get lost in content. We have so many great articles about what's happening in just the world of podcasting. Make sure you follow us on social media, on YouTube at the Podsauce. Social media is at the Podsauce as well, on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. We are trying to deliver this information to everyone as fast as we can.
We're doing our best.
You can find me at Dax Holt.
And you can find me at I am Alesha Renee. Until next time, thank you all so much for joining, for listening, for checking us out. Be good to yourselves. Peace.